In the 1960s, some cars weren't just stylish, they were built to last a lifetime. Strong engines, simple mechanics, and solid steel bodies made them nearly indestructible. These were the cars that families trusted for cross-country trips, that racked up hundreds of thousands of miles, and that some owners swear could run forever with just basic care. Get ready for the 12 most reliable cars of the 1960s. Legends that could run 1,000,000 miles. Timeless machines of strength and endurance. Stick around till the end, and don't forget to subscribe. The 1960-1964 Chevrolet Impala deserves not just praise, but almost mythological reverence, because in many ways it was the car that defined what Americans wanted during that golden age of Detroit. If there were ever a machine that perfectly balanced style, toughness, reliability, and cultural significance, it was this one. Even calling it a car sometimes feels like underselling it. The Impala was a piece of rolling Americana, a steel symphony of curves, chrome, and endurance. Just look at the design. The 60, with its modest fins, still held the echoes of the jet-aged 1950s, while by 64 the Impala had evolved into one of the cleanest, sharpest full-size designs ever made. The long, low profile, the wide stance, the delicate yet commanding triple taillights. This wasn't just a car, it was a sculpture that moved. People didn't just drive Impalas, they showed them off, polished them on Sundays, and parked them proudly in front of diners, because everyone knew the car had presence. Even today, when a 63 or 64 Impala glides past, people stop and stare as though history itself had come rolling back down the road. But beauty alone wouldn't have made the Impala legendary. What cemented its reputation was its indestructibility. The inline-six blue flame under the hood was so reliable it seemed almost supernatural. There are real stories of these engines running with no oil, with cracked blocks, with neglect that would have killed any other motor, and yet they kept going. Taxi drivers in Chicago ran them for 500,000 miles. Small-town sheriffs used them as patrol cars that never broke down in the middle of nowhere. And families crossed the country again and again with nothing more than routine maintenance. A mechanic in California once joked that the only way to stop a Chevy 6 is to run it into a brick wall. And then there were the V8s. The small block 283 and 327 were masterpieces of American engineering, combining smoothness, power, and bulletproof longevity. For those who wanted true thunder, the legendary 409 delivered horsepower and torque that turned the Impala into a factory hot rod. The Beach Boys even immortalized it in song, cementing the Impala's place not just in garages, but in American culture itself. Yet whether you had the humble 6 or the fire-breathing 409, you got the same rugged frame, overbuilt suspension, and heavy steel body that could shrug off years of abuse. The Impala wasn't just a family car, it was a universal car. It was a farmer's workhorse, a taxi driver's bread and butter, a lowrider's canvas, a drag racer's weapon, and a young couple's pride on prom night. No other car managed to be so many things to so many people, while still keeping the same unshakable reputation. Dependable, stylish, and built to last. That's why decades later, mechanics still speak about them with a mix of respect and nostalgia. They'll tell you stories of pulling off valve covers on 300,000-mile engines only to find everything still in working order, or of customers who drove their Impalas until the seats gave out long before the engines did. In truth, the 1960-1964 Impala wasn't just transportation. It was an institution. It was the car that carried families into the suburbs, cruised main streets under neon lights, raced at the drag strip on Saturday night, and took kids to school Monday morning. It embodied the very idea of the American dream on four wheels: affordable, beautiful, tough, and adaptable. That's why, when enthusiasts look back at the golden age of Detroit, the Impala stands as a crown jewel, a reminder of when cars weren't disposable appliances, but proud machines built to endure for generations. To exaggerate the praise just a little, the Impala of this era wasn't just a car you bought, it was a car you built your life around. It was a car that made ordinary people feel extraordinary. It was a car that connected entire communities, and a car that refused to die even when everything else around it changed. Quite simply, it was America on wheels. Do you want me to give the same over-the-top, almost legendary praise treatment to other indestructible classics like the 1955-57 Chevy Bel Air, the 1965-1970 Ford Galaxy, or maybe even the early Dodge Darts? The 1960-1969 Ford Falcon may have been marketed as a cheap, no-nonsense compact car, but in reality, it became something much larger. A legend of durability, a car that embodied the very spirit of American practicality. While the big, flashy machines of the 1960s stole the covers of car magazines, the Falcon was quietly proving itself in driveways, highways, and dusty back roads all across the country. It wasn't meant to be glamorous, it was meant to work. And work it did, better and longer than anyone expected. When it first appeared in 1960, the Falcon was a revelation for American buyers. Up until then, the typical car was a bloated, full-size sedan with heavy styling, large, thirsty V8s, and price tags that were climbing out of reach for working families. Ford's idea was simple: offer a compact car that was cheap to buy, easy to drive, and even easier to maintain. The Falcon was the first of its kind from Detroit to really hit the sweet spot, and it showed in sales. In its debut year alone, Ford sold more than 435,000 of them, and by the end of 1961, they had moved over 1 million. But sales figures are just the numbers. What really mattered was that the Falcon quickly built a reputation for something money couldn't buy: trust. The secret weapon was the inline six. The early Falcons came with the 144 cubic inch straight six, soon joined by the 170 and 200 cubic inch versions. None of these engines were exciting, you were lucky to break 100 horsepower, but they were so incredibly simple and overbuilt that they seemed indestructible. This was an engine you could abuse. Taxi drivers kept their Falcons idling for hours in freezing winters. Farmers drove them down dirt roads with clogged air filters. College kids who barely knew how to open a hood drove them across states in 100-degree heat with oil levels dangerously low. And still, the Falcon 6 kept running. A mechanic from Iowa once joked, "You could run these engines on ditch water and they'd still make it home." Owners swore by them. Stories poured in of Falcons reaching 200,000, 300,000, even 500,000 miles with only basic care. The transmissions were nearly as tough, especially the 3-speed manuals, which could take years of missed shifts and ham-fisted drivers without complaint. The rest of the car was built with the same philosophy: simple, sturdy, forgiving. No finicky electrical systems, no complicated suspension geometry, just a car that did what it was asked, day after day, year after year. It became a favorite of taxi companies. In the Midwest, fleets of Falcons in dull shades of beige and green hauled passengers for pennies a mile, and the companies kept them in service until the bodies rusted so badly that doors stopped shutting properly. But the engines never gave up. Police departments in smaller towns sometimes used them as patrol cars, not because they were fast, but because they were cheap and they simply would not die. Families bought them as second cars and ended up keeping them far longer than expected. Of course, rust was the Falcon's Achilles heel. By the late 1960s, in states like Michigan, Ohio, and New York, the salted winter roads ate through the sheet metal faster than the drivetrain could wear out. Many Falcons became what owners jokingly called Flintstones cars, with floors that rusted away so badly you could see the pavement below. But even in that state, with holes in the body, the car would start every morning, shift into gear, and take you where you needed to go. One owner summed it up perfectly. The Falcon didn't wear out. It rusted away under you while the engine just kept going. Ironically, this humble little car also laid the foundation for one of the most famous cars in history, the Ford Mustang. The first-generation Mustang was essentially a Falcon underneath. Ford used the Falcon's platform, drivetrain, and basic engineering as the skeleton for the Mustang in 1964. Without the Falcon's rock-solid simplicity, there would be no Mustang. In that sense, every high-performance Shelby GT350 or Boss 302 owes its life to the Falcon, the plain little family car that made it all possible. And while the Falcon was never a muscle car itself, hot rodders eventually discovered its potential. With a small block V8 swap, something Ford itself eventually offered in later years, the Falcon became a lightweight sleeper, a car that looked like a grocery getter but could surprise bigger machines at the drag strip. Yet even those hopped-up versions retained the Falcon's basic charm: simple, rugged, and never asking for much in return. The Falcon represented a kind of honesty that is hard to find in cars today. It wasn't designed to impress your neighbors. It wasn't built to set speed records. It was built to be there for you, every day, every season, every trip. It was the car that took kids to school, parents to work, families on vacations, and young people on their first real adventures. It was a car that taught America that small could be tough, that cheap could be dependable, and that sometimes the greatest cars aren't the ones that roar the loudest, but the ones that simply never give up. When people look back on the 1960s, they remember the Mustangs, the GTOs, the Chargers. But ask the man who drove a Falcon for 20 years, and he'll tell you something different. He'll tell you about a car that never let him down, that was always ready in the driveway, that outlasted almost everything else in his life. The Falcon may have been modest, but it built its reputation on something more valuable than horsepower: loyalty. Would you like me to give the same kind of long, almost nostalgic, over-the-top praise to the Plymouth Valiant or Chevy Nova next, since those too had a reputation for running until the body gave up? The 1961-1969 Dodge Dart will forever stand as one of those cars that punched far above its weight, not because it was flashy or glamorous, but because it carried under its hood one of the greatest engines Detroit ever built, Chrysler's Slant 6. To this day, mechanics, collectors, and old-timers talk about the Slant 6 with reverence, almost as if it were some mythological creature forged in iron instead of flesh. Its reputation for durability became so legendary that it eclipsed the car itself, turning the Dart into a symbol of toughness, reliability, and the kind of old-school engineering that was too stubborn to die. The story begins with Chrysler's desire to modernize its engines in the late 1950s. Inline sixes had been around for decades, but they were tall, heavy, and limited in design. Chrysler's engineers came up with something radical for the time: tip the block 30 degrees to the side. By doing so, they lowered the overall engine height, which allowed for sleeker hood lines and improved carburetor placement. More importantly, this unusual slant gave the engine a distinctive look that set it apart from every other six-cylinder on the road. The Slant 6 looked odd, almost cockeyed, but what mattered was its guts. It was built with a forged steel crankshaft, beefy connecting rods, and oversized main bearings that made it nearly indestructible. The Dart, Introduced in 1960 and settling into its compact form by 1963, became the perfect showcase for the Slant 6. Buyers who chose the 170 or 225 cubic inch versions didn't get blazing acceleration. 0 to 60 was measured in yawns, not cheers. But what they got was a car that would start every morning and simply refuse to quit. Farmers in the Midwest swore by them. College students bought them second-hand and drove them coast to coast without ever touching a wrench. Taxi fleets put them into brutal service and found that the Slant 6 outlasted the very bodies of the cars. The real proof of the engine's strength came not on the street, but in the junkyards. Mechanics loved to show off by firing up Slant 6s in wrecked darts that had been sitting for months, sometimes years. With a little fresh gas and a battery, these engines would cough once, then settle into a steady, sewing machine idle, like nothing had ever happened. Stories spread of engines that had been run with no oil, overheated until the paint burned off the valve cover, or left outside in freezing winters with dead batteries, only to roar back to life with minimal effort. One mechanic famously said, "You could drain the oil, run it dry, and the Slant 6 would just keep grumbling along until the rest of the car fell apart." Owners remember them with a kind of fondness usually reserved for faithful dogs. A retired mail carrier recalled that his dart wagon went over 400,000 miles delivering letters in all weather, from scorching summers to icy blizzards, and the only engine work he ever did was a water pump and valve cover gasket. Another owner in Montana swore that his dart started every morning at 20 below zero, while newer cars around it groaned and died. There's even a famous tale of a man who tried to blow up his Slant 6 by flooring it in neutral and leaving it revving for hours. When he came back, the engine was still running. Of course, the Dart itself wasn't without character. By the mid-1960s, it had clean, understated styling, roomy interiors for a compact, and a reputation as a solid, no-nonsense car. The V8s gave it some bite, and in the hands of drag racers, the Dart would go on to become a serious performer. But for everyday Americans, the six-cylinder Dart was the workhorse, the family hauler, the commuter car, the taxi, the cheap set of wheels that never let them down. Rust might eventually eat away at the body panels and floorboards, but the drivetrain was always the last thing to give up. The Dart's Slant 6 legend grew so strong that Chrysler kept building it well beyond the Dart's heyday. It lived on in other models through the 1970s, into vans, trucks, and fleet vehicles. It became the kind of engine you'd hand down through generations, because it wasn't just reliable, it was practically eternal. Today, enthusiasts who find an old Dart in a field often discover that even with decades of neglect, a little carburetor cleaning and fresh spark plugs will bring the Slant 6 roaring back to life. The Dart may not have been the fastest car of the 1960s, or the prettiest, or the most famous, but in terms of loyalty, toughness, and sheer mechanical willpower, it earned a place among the immortals. It was the car that proved you didn't need a high-performance badge or a big V8 to achieve greatness. All you needed was an engine that never gave up, and the Dodge Dart had exactly that. Do you want me to give the same kind of epic, over-the-top praise to the Plymouth Valiant next? That car shared the Slant 6 DNA, but built its own reputation as a humble giant killer. The 1962-1967 Chevrolet Nova, born as the Chevy 2, was not meant to be a legend. In fact, Chevrolet designed it with an almost stubborn sense of plainness. No fancy engineering experiments, no futuristic styling, no expensive gimmicks. GM had just watched Ford clean up with the Falcon in 1960, and Chevy needed its own compact to get in the game quickly, so they built the Chevy 2 in record time. Clean sheep to showroom in just 18 months. It was small, simple, light, and cheap. But what nobody expected was that this little car would go on to become one of the most durable and beloved workhorses of its era, with a reputation that still earns respect today. At its core, the Chevy 2/Nova was an everyman's car, Available as a two-door, four-door, wagon, and even a convertible, it was designed to give families, commuters, and young buyers a practical choice that wouldn't cost much to buy or maintain. Most were sold with the trusty Chevrolet inline-six engines, the 153 cubic inch four-cylinder, Chevy's first ever, and the 194, 230, and later 250 inline sixes. These weren't engines that wowed anyone at stoplights, but they were famously understressed, overbuilt, and easy to service. The six-cylinder Nova earned its reputation not by exciting people, but by refusing to break year after year, mile after mile. A Nova with 200,000 miles on the odometer was nothing unusual, and with regular oil changes, many went far beyond that. What made the Nova so beloved was its honesty. It didn't try to be something it wasn't. In an era when Detroit was starting to add fins, chrome, stripes, and marketing hype to everything, the Nova remained straightforward. If you bought one, you knew exactly what you were getting. Dependable transportation with just enough style to avoid embarrassment. Teenagers in the 1970s discovered them as cheap used cars that could take endless abuse, whether it was clutch dumps in the high school parking lot or long highway trips to nowhere. Families trusted them as commuter cars, and many young couples drove them for years before passing them down to their kids. Mechanics loved them because everything was accessible, parts were cheap, and nothing was overcomplicated. The Nova's simplicity became its superpower. While some compact cars of the era tried experimental designs or unproven technology, the Chevy 2 was built with conventional unibody construction, proven drivetrain layouts, and components that had been tested in millions of other GM vehicles. This meant fewer headaches, fewer recalls, and fewer reasons to junk the car early. Even when rust eventually claimed many of them in the northern states, it was rarely the engine or transmission that sent the Nova to the scrapyard. It was usually the body giving up long before the drivetrain did. Of course, Chevrolet wasn't blind to performance buyers either. By 1964, the Nova could be ordered with a V8, and eventually became a serious street machine when hot rodders discovered how well the lightweight body took to bigger engines. But in its 1962-1967 form, the Nova's true legend was as the faithful daily driver. It was the car your neighbor started every morning without fail. It was the hand-me-down that somehow refused to die. It was the little Chevy that asked for so little and gave back so much. Stories from owners cement its reputation. A retired teacher remembered buying a '65 Nova new, driving it to work for 20 years, then giving it to her son, who drove it through college, then sold it to a friend who later brought it back running after another decade. Another owner recalled changing the oil every 3,000 miles on his '63 six-cylinder and watching it sail past 300,000 miles with the original engine, never once leaving him stranded. For many, the Nova wasn't just a car, it was a member of the family that hung around long after flashier machines came and went. By the time the first-generation Nova bowed out in 1967, it had already established itself as a classic piece of American iron. Later Novas would gain fame in the muscle car world, but the original compact six-cylinder models remain admired for their sheer toughness. They weren't glamorous, but they were honest, and in the long run, that honesty is what made them unforgettable. Would you like me to make the next one in this series about the Plymouth Valiant, since it was the Nova's great rival and equally legendary for its durability? The 1960-1969 Plymouth Valiant is one of those cars that, while never flashy, earned a reputation so solid that even decades later people still tell stories about how unstoppable they were. Chrysler had originally designed the Valiant as a compact car to compete with the Ford Falcon and Chevrolet Chevy 2, and in doing so they stumbled into something far greater than just another affordable family runabout. The Valiant became one of the most durable, dependable, and surprisingly beloved cars of its decade, almost entirely because of one thing: the slant-six engine. The Slant 6 was an engineering masterstroke. Introduced in 1960, it got its name because the engine block was tilted 30 degrees to the right, giving it that distinctive slanted look under the hood. Chrysler's engineers did this partly to allow for a lower hood line, but the design also gave the intake manifold longer, straighter runners, improving breathing and making the engine smoother. More importantly, Chrysler overbuilt this motor to such an extent that it became practically indestructible. Available in 170, 198, and 225 cubic inch displacements, the Slant 6 wasn't about raw power. Though the 225 had enough torque to move the car smartly, it was about reliability that bordered on myth. Owners quickly discovered that the Valiant with a Slant 6 could survive levels of neglect that would kill other cars. Skip oil changes, run cheap gas, ignore tune-ups, the Valiant would still start, idle, and get you to work. Mechanics often joked that the car could run on swamp water if you poured it into the tank. Taxi fleets bought them in droves during the 1960s because the Valiant could rack up 300,000, 400,000, even 500,000 miles without a rebuild. Junkyards famously loved to show off wrecked Slant 6s. They would drop a battery in, crank it over, and the engine would fire up as if nothing had happened. That wasn't legend, it was reality. What made the Valiant special wasn't just the engine, though. The car itself was a model of no-nonsense engineering. Chrysler kept the design simple, a straightforward unibody, basic suspension, and minimal frills inside. Everything about it was geared toward longevity and low maintenance. Parts were cheap, repairs were easy, and mechanics didn't dread working on them like they did with some more complex imports of the time. It was a car that an average backyard mechanic could keep alive with a few hand tools and a service manual. Culturally, the Valiant wasn't glamorous. It never had the image of the Mustang or Camaro, nor the prestige of a Cadillac. But it had something those cars lacked: trust. Families bought them as commuters and knew they'd never be stranded. Farmers used them as second vehicles, often keeping them running for decades. College kids in the 1970s bought battered 60s Valiants for next to nothing and still drove them cross-country without worry. And because they were so common, parts were everywhere, making it even easier to keep them alive. Stories from owners abound. One man recalled driving his 1963 Valiant for over 400,000 miles without ever pulling the head. He said the body eventually rusted away around the drivetrain, but the motor never quit. Another woman remembered inheriting her father's 1966 Valiant in the late 80s. By then, it had over 300,000 miles and was still her daily driver until she finally donated it, still running, in the 1990s. Mechanics from the era often say the same thing. If they had to bet their paycheck on a car starting on a cold morning, they'd put their money on a Valiant. By the end of the 1960s, the Valiant had cemented itself as one of the toughest compacts of all time. It wasn't beautiful and it wasn't exciting, but it was a survivor. The car had a way of inspiring loyalty, because once you owned one, you realized just how much abuse it could take and still keep going. In a decade when American cars were often accused of being big, wasteful, and fragile, the Plymouth Valiant stood apart as proof that sometimes the simplest designs, executed with toughness in mind, could outlast everything else on the road. The 1960 to 1969 Checker Marathon is not just a car, it's a legend of sheer endurance, a rolling monument to practicality, and perhaps the single most durable American automobile ever mass-produced for urban service. In an era where automotive fashion often trumped engineering sensibility, the Marathon was unapologetically utilitarian. Its boxy, almost industrial exterior design has become iconic, not because it was sleek or aspirational, but because it broadcast a simple, honest message. This car was built to last forever, no compromises. Unlike its contemporaries that emphasize style, speed, or gimmicky luxury, the Marathon was singularly focused on survivability, functionality, and the unforgiving demands of daily city life. Checker Motors Corporation, based in Kalamazoo, Michigan, engineered the Marathon from the ground up with this philosophy. Its body was framed in heavy-gauge steel, reinforced to withstand not just accidents, but decades of continuous operation. The doors were thick and resilient, the roof high and rigid, and the floor pan virtually immune to bending, all constructed to endure the relentless pounding of taxi duty. Inside, simplicity was king. Vinyl seats, basic mechanical gauges, and minimal trim meant fewer parts to fail and more reliability on the road. There was no room for unnecessary gadgets, which was perfect because every element of the car was designed for functionality over flair. The interior could survive years of passengers climbing in and out, carrying luggage, groceries, or the occasional errant suitcase, all without showing signs of premature wear. Underneath, the Checker Marathon was almost comically overbuilt for its purpose. It often housed Chevrolet's legendary inline-six engines, like the 230 and 250 cubic inch units, or small block V8s in later iterations. These engines were meticulously engineered for longevity, with overbuilt crankshafts, robust cylinder heads, and an unflappable torque curve. Fleet mechanics marveled at how even abused engines, after hundreds of thousands of miles, could still start on cold mornings without hesitation. Some Checker engines reportedly ran over 500,000 miles on original components before requiring a major overhaul, a feat almost unimaginable in modern cars. Transmission choices were simple but effective. Sturdy 3-speed manuals or smooth 2- and 3-speed automatics that could survive decades of abuse, shuttling countless fare-paying passengers across New York, Boston, and Chicago. The Marathon's suspension and chassis were equally legendary. Its solid rear axle, reinforced leaf springs, and exceptionally durable front suspension components allowed it to absorb the constant beatings of city streets without giving in. Potholes, curbs, speed bumps, and curbside scrapes were virtually irrelevant. Mechanics often joked that the car would outlast not only its driver, but the streets it drove on. Even in heavy traffic, with stop-and-go driving, double shifts, and high passenger loads, the Marathon maintained composure. Its braking system, while simple drum brakes on all four corners for most years, was oversized and easy to maintain, allowing it to reliably bring 3,000-plus pounds of taxi to a halt repeatedly over years of punishing service. Checker Marathons were famously immortal in the taxi world. In cities like New York, Boston, and Chicago, fleets would routinely run these cars into the hundreds of thousands of miles, sometimes approaching or even surpassing the million-mile mark on original engines and drivetrains. Stories abound of Marathons still ferrying passengers with bent body panels, peeling paint, and dented fenders, yet mechanically flawless. Engines ticking, transmission smooth, suspensions intact. Owners often noted that these cars were less about performance and more about trust. If a Checker pulled up, you knew it would go the distance, every time. Durability also extended to their corrosion resistance for the era. While rust eventually claimed many, the Marathon's body panels, heavy steel frame, and thoughtful design delayed the inevitable far longer than most contemporaries. Dealers and mechanics reported that it wasn't unusual for a Marathon to outlive the average American family that purchased it. One driver famously claimed that his Marathon would keep going even if the rest of the car rotted away around it. For fleet operators, this meant fewer replacements, lower maintenance costs, and almost mythic reliability. A car that simply refused to die, whether under the constant stoplight sprint conditions of Manhattan or the pothole-riddled streets of Chicago. Beyond mechanics, the Checker Marathon became a cultural icon precisely because of its durability. Its boxy silhouette, tall tall roofline and broad, unadorned panels symbolized dependability and unpretentious practicality. Cinematically, it was instantly recognizable as the quintessential American taxi, appearing in countless films, TV shows, and photographs of urban life in the 1960s and 70s. Yet, unlike many celebrity cars of the time, its fame came from substance rather than style. The Checker's influence was practical. It set the standard for what a workhorse vehicle could be, showing that longevity, serviceability, and toughness could define a car's legacy as much as speed or glamour. In sum, the 1960 to 1969 Checker Marathon was more than a taxi or a fleet car. It was a monument to over-engineered endurance. Its engines, suspensions, bodywork, and interiors were designed to survive everything the streets could throw at them, from punishing daily shifts to decades of city life abuse. Mechanics, taxi operators, and fleet owners all recognized it as almost indestructible. Unlike the flashy, ephemeral cars of its era, the Marathon wasn't about trends or acceleration. It was about absolute reliability, durability, and timeless practicality. Driving one was like piloting a miniature steel fortress on wheels, a vehicle that didn't just move people, it carried generations of passengers safely, predictably, and without complaint. If any car can lay claim to being eternal, it's the Checker Marathon, a machine so overbuilt, so indestructible, that even today surviving examples remain as testaments to a time when cars could be built to last a lifetime and sometimes even longer. The 1965 to 1969 Buick LeSabre wasn't just another full-size car rolling off GM's assembly line. It was a monument to the quiet durability and engineering prudence that Buick had honed for decades. While muscle cars screamed for attention and imports dazzled with exotic styling, the LeSabre quietly went about its business, delivering decades of trouble-free motoring for anyone smart enough to appreciate longevity over flash. Its big iron block 300 and 340 V8 engines were marvels of understated American engineering, simple, rugged, and designed to be worked on easily. Unlike some high-strung performance engines of the era, these Buick's power plants thrived on regular maintenance, but could endure neglect far better than most. Mechanics from coast to coast have stories of LeSabres with 200,000, 250,000, or even 300,000 miles on the original engine and transmission, still pulling smoothly with oil consumption negligible and valve trains untouched, thanks to Buick's famously precise machining tolerances. Buick's automatic transmissions, especially the Super Turbine 300 and later versions of the THM 400 derivatives, were similarly remarkable. Fleet owners, retirees, and long-distance drivers alike discovered that these transmissions would often outlast the car's suspension or paint. There were very few mechanical surprises, no sudden failures, no overheating, no temperamental electronics to frustrate owners. Instead, the LeSabre rewarded careful driving with predictably smooth, reliable performance over the long haul. Its torque-rich V8s could handle heavy loads, full family road trips, and even city towing jobs without complaint. Anecdotal tales from owners describe trips across multiple states without a single breakdown, the engines humming like finely tuned musical instruments for hundreds of thousands of miles. The LeSabre's suspension was another understated marvel. Buick engineers equipped it with robust coil spring front suspension, heavy-duty rear leaf springs, and a frame built to resist twisting, sagging, or rusting prematurely. The ride quality was plush enough to comfort long-haul drivers, but the car's chassis could take rough roads, potholes, and suburban winters with barely a groan. Steering remained precise enough for highway use, but never required excessive attention. And brakes, generous drums front and rear, were durable, forgiving, and easy to service. Owners often marveled that their cars could outlast entire families, serving multiple generations of drivers with minimal fuss. Durability wasn't just under the hood. Buick's bodywork and trim also stood the test of time. While not immune to rust entirely, the LeSabre's heavy steel panels, sturdy roof pillars, and well-fitted doors resisted warping or rattling. Interiors, often finished in hard-wearing cloth or leather, survived decades of sun, heat, and wear. Controls, knobs, and switches were simple and mechanical, meaning replacements were rare and easy to source. Even the electrical systems, nothing exotic, just 12 volts of carefully routed power, remained serviceable well past 100,000 miles, a testament to Buick's commitment to longevity rather than flashy gadgetry. Highway drivers and retirees gravitated toward the LeSabre not just because it could endure, but because it did so gracefully. Unlike the noisy, rough-riding compacts or temperamental imports of the same era, the LeSabre offered a smooth, quiet, and steady companionship. Fleet operators discovered its virtues as well. Some police departments and taxi companies briefly used LeSabres in limited numbers, primarily for their dependable engines and low maintenance demands. Private owners, meanwhile, often reported that even after decades, a well-kept LeSabre could still comfortably cruise at highway speeds, with the engine barely breaking a sweat and the transmission shifting as smoothly as the day it left the factory. In essence, the 1965 to 1969 Buick LeSabre was a rolling testament to conservative yet brilliant engineering. It eschewed flash, avoided the pitfalls of overcomplicated electronics, and delivered a combination of smoothness, torque, and reliability that allowed it to outlast almost every competitor in its class. Owners didn't just buy a car, they invested in a machine that would, with basic care, survive decades of use, hauling families, groceries, or road trip luggage without complaint. It was a luxury in its own right, the rare kind that comes not from fleeting style or peak horsepower, but from knowing your car will start, drive, and endure, mile after mile, year after year, without ever asking for sympathy. The 1960-1966 Ford F-100 wasn't just a pickup, it was a symbol of American work ethic. A vehicle so overbuilt and reliable that it became legendary in farms, small towns, and even cities across the country. From the very first glance, the F-100 exuded practicality and toughness. Its body-on-frame construction was simple but virtually indestructible, with a ladder frame that could survive decades of hauling, towing, and pounding down rough country roads without bending or cracking. Even heavily loaded beds, carrying firewood, feed, or construction materials, barely left a mark on the truck's structure. The leaf spring suspension, both front and rear, was designed to absorb shocks from rocky farm lanes, pothole-filled streets, or uneven terrain, keeping the truck drivable when many other vehicles would have been shaking apart. Under the hood, Ford's inline-six engines were marvels of reliability. The 223 and 292 cubic-inch sixes ran at low compression, burned oil slowly, if at all, and tolerated neglect that would ruin modern engines. Mechanics of the time often marveled at these motors. They could survive decades with only oil changes and the occasional spark plug swap. The Y-block V8s, though more powerful, shared the same philosophy of durability. Cast from thick iron, overbuilt, and stress-tested in Ford's factories, they were engines that could endure towing, heavy loads, or high-mileage daily driving for years without complaint. Anecdotes abound of engines still firing reliably after 300,000 or even 400,000 miles, with the original crankshaft, rods, and pistons. The F-100's transmission and drivetrain were equally resilient. 3-speed manuals were straightforward, easy to service, and capable of surviving years of abuse. Optional 2- or 3-speed automatics were similarly durable, often outlasting the lifespan of the original owner's first farm. The rear axle assemblies, whether standard or heavy-duty, were nearly indestructible. Farmers would haul tractors, livestock, and lumber with ease, and the axles and differentials showed little wear, even after decades of heavy use. Even the cab and bed reflected Ford's commitment to longevity. Thick-gauge steel panels resisted dents, rust crept in only where neglect allowed, and the simple mechanical systems, door latches, window regulators, seat adjustments, were built to endure endless cycles of use. The interior, while Spartan by today's standards, was functional and repairable. Bench seats, straightforward gauges, and minimal trim meant fewer parts to fail. Many owners found that with a bit of oil, a hammer, and some ingenuity, the truck could keep running almost indefinitely. The F-100 was more than the sum of its parts. It was a partner in work and life. Farmers relied on them to pull plows, carry feed, and haul harvests. Delivery drivers depended on them to transport goods day after day without mechanical tantrums. Families used them as daily drivers, often in areas with no paved roads, enduring freezing winters, muddy springs, and blistering summers. There are countless stories of F-100s sitting idle in barns for decades, covered in dust and cobwebs, only to start up on the first crank and drive as if they had never been abandoned. One particularly famous tale involves a 1962 F-100 that was left unused for 25 years in a rural shed. After a thorough inspection and fresh fuel, it roared to life and continued hauling hay without any significant repairs. Part of the truck's enduring legend was its simplicity. With no computers, electronics, or complex fuel systems, the F-100 could be repaired with hand tools and basic mechanical knowledge. Replacement parts were abundant and affordable, meaning even decades later, a loyal owner could keep their truck on the road indefinitely. Its straightforward engineering meant that engines could be rebuilt in a farm garage, transmissions repaired with a vise and wrenches, and rust spots patched without specialized equipment. In short, it was a truck that owners could literally keep alive forever. Even today, the 1960-1966 Ford F-100 commands respect among collectors, mechanics, and historians. Its legacy is not in flash or speed, but in endurance, resilience, and the quiet promise that, as long as there's fuel and oil, it will keep moving. The F-100 wasn't just a truck, it was an institution, a rolling monument to practicality and toughness. It stood as a testament to the philosophy that vehicles should serve faithfully and reliably without drama or pretense. Those who were lucky enough to own one often say it was more than metal and steel. It was a lifelong companion, capable of outliving its drivers and still getting the job done mile after mile, year after year. If you want, I can continue by writing an equally detailed, almost novel-length profile of the contemporary rival, the 1960-1966 Chevrolet C/K pickup, showing why it also became a near-mythical example of American durability. The 1960-1969 AMC Rambler American stands as a testament to the philosophy that a car does not need glamour, flash, or jaw-dropping performance to earn a place in automotive history. Instead, its legacy rests on dependability, practicality, and a quiet durability that often outshines more celebrated machines. Introduced at the dawn of the 1960s, the Rambler American was AMC's answer to a growing American appetite for smaller, economical cars that didn't sacrifice longevity for trendiness. While Detroit's Big Three were pouring resources into flashy fins, swooping fastbacks, and increasingly complex V8s, AMC focused on creating something that would survive decades of daily abuse, a car that worked as hard as its owners, year in and year out. From the moment the Rambler American hit the streets, it became apparent that AMC's engineers prioritized substance over style. The car's compact, boxy design may have appeared plain, almost dull when parked next to a Chevrolet Impala or Ford Falcon with chrome and fins, but this simplicity was part of its brilliance. The body-on-frame construction was robust, forgiving under the pressures of uneven roads, heavy loads, and harsh weather. Unlike some of its contemporaries, which suffered from sagging suspensions or brittle panels after years of normal use, the Rambler maintained structural integrity, making it an ideal choice for small-town families, taxi fleets, and even commercial users who demanded reliability above all else. At the heart of the Rambler American's indestructibility was its lineup of inline-six engines. AMC's 195 and 232 cubic inch units were designed with longevity in mind. These engines were not designed to be fire-breathing monsters. Instead, they thrived on understated efficiency and durability. Owners frequently reported vehicles that ran reliably well past 200,000 miles, often with minimal maintenance beyond routine oil changes and periodic tune-ups. Unlike some of the era's complex V8s, the Rambler's inline sixes were easy to service. Parts were inexpensive and widely available, and a competent mechanic could diagnose and fix nearly any problem without the need for specialized equipment. Stories from the era include cars that had survived decades of city driving, fleet service, and rural abuse, engines still firing faithfully after the original bodywork had succumbed to rust or minor collisions. The transmission systems matched the engines in durability. Manual gearboxes were simple, strong, and responsive, rarely requiring more than clutch replacement or basic lubrication to remain functional over decades. Automatic transmissions, although slightly less sophisticated than modern units, were known for longevity, often outlasting the tires and even the body panels of the vehicles themselves. Rear axles and differentials were similarly robust, engineered to tolerate both the heavy daily use of fleet cars and the occasional overloading that might cripple less sturdy vehicles. Owners often recount anecdotes of Rambler Americans that survived urban abuse, repeated hard stops, and highway miles that would challenge even some of Detroit's more celebrated mid-size cars. The car's suspension and braking systems were another area where AMC prioritized reliability. Independent front suspension paired with coil springs provided a comfortable yet durable ride, while the rear leaf springs could handle payloads and passengers alike without sagging. Brakes were responsive for the time, with drum systems that could be maintained with basic tools and knowledge. Unlike competitors that required frequent, expensive attention to maintain braking efficiency, the Rambler's systems were straightforward and resilient, making it a favorite among small-town drivers who valued practicality over flash. Inside, the Rambler American was equally pragmatic. The interiors were simple, durable, and designed to withstand real-world wear and tear. Seats were firm but resilient, with upholstery that resisted rips, fading, and stains far better than many contemporary domestic cars. Dashboard instruments were minimalistic but functional, and the controls were intuitive and robust. In a world where many cars of the 1960s prioritized flashy knobs, gimmicky gauges, and styling flourishes, the Rambler offered only what was necessary, a reflection of AMC's commitment to substance over style. Even amenities like heating, ventilation, and optional radios were designed to be serviceable and long-lasting rather than delicate or expensive to replace. The Rambler American also excelled in versatility. Compact enough to navigate tight city streets and parking spaces, yet spacious enough for a family or modest cargo, it became a favorite among fleet buyers, taxis, and small businesses. Police departments in smaller cities frequently adopted them for their reliability, ease of maintenance, and surprisingly durable handling characteristics. Owners recall these vehicles handling everything from heavy urban traffic to gravel roads with remarkable steadiness, proving that the car's engineering could adapt to a variety of challenging conditions. Stories of Rambler Americans surviving decades of use are legion. There are accounts of cars that endured harsh northern winters, salted roads, and summer heat with barely more than routine maintenance. Some survived long enough to be passed down through generations, engines still starting on the first crank, transmissions still shifting smoothly, and suspensions still forgiving potholes. Many of these cars became the ultimate beater cars that continued performing long after the body panels rusted away, outliving countless flashier vehicles that looked attractive but lacked the Rambler's substance. The true brilliance of the Rambler American lies in its quiet, almost invisible endurance. While sports cars, flashy coupes, and luxury sedans garnered headlines and magazine covers, the Rambler accumulated a different kind of prestige, one earned in garages, back roads, and fleet depots across America. It proved that longevity, simplicity, and reliability could not only satisfy drivers, but also earn a lasting reputation that outshines even the most celebrated muscle cars or luxury sedans of the same era. By the time AMC phased out the Rambler American in 1969, it had cemented its status as one of America's most dependable compacts. Its engines, transmissions, suspensions, and simple yet practical design philosophy allowed it to survive where many more glamorous vehicles failed. From small-town family cars to city taxis to rural workhorses, the Rambler American became a symbol of a car that could truly endure. A machine built not to dazzle for a season, but to serve faithfully for decades. Its legacy is a quiet, unwavering testament to practicality, and it remains a touchstone for enthusiasts who value durability, engineering foresight, and the rare quality of a car that just keeps running, no matter what. If you want, I can continue this profile to include individual year-by-year quirks, mechanical changes, fleet anecdotes, and long-term owner stories, expanding it into one of the most exhaustive Rambler American histories ever written. Do you want me to do that next? The 1962 to 1969 Chevrolet Suburban was far more than just a large wagon. It was a symbol of American practicality and durability, a vehicle built to survive decades of hard use when most cars of its era couldn't. Long before the SUV craze transformed American roads, the Suburban was quietly carrying families, cargo, and commercial loads with the kind of rugged dependability that would become legendary. Its massive body-on-frame construction, combined with simple suspension design and a robust drivetrain, made it virtually indestructible under normal and even extreme conditions. Under the hood, buyers could choose from Chevy's tried-and-true small-block V8 engines, which were famous for their reliability, simplicity, and longevity. Even under heavy loads, towing trailers, or traveling unpaved rural roads, these engines rarely faltered. Stories abound of early Suburbans exceeding 300,000 miles on original powertrains, often requiring little more than routine oil changes and basic maintenance. Mechanics from the era would often remark that a Suburban might outlast the barn it's parked in, a testament to the combination of rugged engineering and overbuilt components. The Suburban's body was just as formidable as its drivetrain. Its massive steel panels and heavy-duty frame allowed it to survive decades of wear and tear, from city streets full of potholes to farm roads laden with mud, gravel, and snow. Rust was the Suburban's main weakness, particularly in northern climates, where salted roads accelerated corrosion. Yet even here, owners found that the mechanical components often outlived the bodywork. Many would patch, repaint, or otherwise repair the exterior, while the engine, transmission, and axles continued performing like new. Space was one of the Suburban's greatest advantages. Long before minivans or modern SUVs, families could fit children, groceries, luggage, and even livestock in the back without sacrificing comfort for the passengers in front. Ranchers and farmers appreciated the cargo capacity and towing ability, using these vehicles to haul equipment, feed, or trailers. Delivery companies leveraged the Suburban's size and reliability for decades, keeping them on the road far longer than smaller, lighter vans of the period. Its versatility was unmatched. From suburban errands to rural chores, the Suburban adapted seamlessly to almost any role. The interior, while simple, was built to last. Seats were durable, vinyl surfaces resisted wear, and dashboards were uncomplicated, reducing the likelihood of breakdowns in the field. Heating systems, basic gauges, and mechanical switches were all designed to function reliably for years, even with minimal maintenance. This no-frills approach was ideal for owners who valued performance and longevity over luxury. Suburbans of this generation were also surprisingly rugged in extreme conditions. Farmers drove them across rough terrain, snow plows were sometimes mounted on them, delivery drivers loaded them heavily day after day. Yet the combination of Chevy's reliable V8s, robust suspension, and solid axles allowed them to withstand punishment that would sideline other vehicles. Anecdotes from ranchers and fleet operators describe Suburbans that started after winters in unheated barns, hauled oversized loads without complaints, and returned from long, grueling trips across rural America as if nothing had happened. Even in urban settings, the Suburban earned praise for its utility. Police departments, fire departments, and municipal services used them as multi-purpose vehicles, appreciating their durability, interior space, and ability to accommodate heavy equipment. They were never glamorous or fast, but their ability to keep going year after year earned them a quiet but profound respect among those who relied on them for work, family, or both. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the 1962 to 1969 Suburban is its longevity. While many cars of the 1960s succumbed to rust, mechanical failure, or obsolescence within a decade, Suburbans continued running strong for decades, often with original engines, transmissions, and suspensions intact. Their reputation for reliability, combined with unmatched cargo capacity and versatility, made them a vehicle that could truly serve multiple generations. Families, businesses, and municipalities all came to rely on the Suburban, not just as a vehicle, but as an essential tool that could weather almost anything. This period of Chevrolet Suburban history demonstrates how functionality, engineering foresight, and overbuilt design can create a vehicle that outlasts trends, style, and even competitors. While it lacked the flash of Corvettes or the muscle of Chevelles, the Suburban's true glory lay in its endurance, adaptability, and the simple fact that, when properly maintained, it would just keep going, miles and miles beyond what most other vehicles could hope to achieve. If you want, I can continue by creating a deeper dive into individual model years, specific engine and drivetrain quirks, and long-term owner stories from this 1962 to 1969 Suburban era, which would give a full picture of why these vehicles became almost mythical in their reliability. Do you want me to do that next? The 1964 to 1969 Pontiac Catalina stands as one of the most remarkable examples of American automotive durability, combining Pontiac's signature mid-60s styling with mechanical robustness that has earned it near-legendary status among classic car enthusiasts, fleet managers, and anyone who needed a dependable full-size vehicle. Though it lacked the high-performance image of its GTO sibling, the Catalina was a car built to last, and its reliability was both predictable and extraordinary, the kind that made mechanics and owners marvel at its ability to keep going despite decades of hard use. Under the hood, the Catalina offered a range of Pontiac's big block V8s, including the 389, 400, and later the 428 cubic inch engines, all of which were built with durability in mind. These engines were heavily cast, simple in design, and remarkably tolerant of abuse. They could handle high-mileage daily driving, towing, and even the demands of law enforcement without failing prematurely. Torque-rich and robust, they were the heart of a drivetrain that rarely needed rebuilding, with many examples seen running strong well past 200,000 miles, and numerous instances exceeding 300,000 miles with nothing more than routine maintenance such as oil changes, tune-ups, and occasional minor adjustments. Even with the heavier automatic transmissions, like the TH400 and TH350, which were paired expertly with these engines, the Catalina handled frequent shifts, stop-and-go traffic, and long highway hauls with little strain. Axles, drive shafts, and suspension components were equally overbuilt, making these cars almost impervious to the stresses that would cripple lesser vehicles. The Catalina's reputation for toughness wasn't limited to private ownership. Police departments, highway patrols, and other government fleets across the United States relied heavily on this full-size Pontiac, often putting them through grueling service routines that included long shifts, high-speed pursuits, and heavy-duty equipment loads. Patrol cars would routinely exceed 150,000 to 200,000 miles before being retired, and many continued in civilian service for years afterward. Fleet managers praised the Catalina's predictable maintenance needs, ease of repair, and widespread availability of parts, making it a workhorse that could be depended upon without frequent costly overhauls. Stories from former fleet drivers often recount Catalinas still running flawlessly after decades of service, with engines, transmissions, and drivetrains fully operational, even when the body was showing significant wear or surface rust. Structurally, the Catalina was built like a tank. Its full-frame construction, thick steel body panels, and rugged suspension design made it resistant to minor collisions and the everyday rigors of American roads. While rust could affect older examples, particularly in northern climates, the mechanical integrity often outlasted cosmetic deterioration by decades. Even in families that put the car through daily abuse, carrying passengers, luggage, or towing light trailers, the Catalina's drivetrain would remain nearly indestructible. Interior components, including the robust vinyl seats, mechanical gauges, switches, and trim, were built to withstand years of continuous use without failing, making it a comfortable, reliable, and practical vehicle for all kinds of drivers. One of the Catalina's standout qualities was its combination of size, comfort, and mechanical endurance. Families could travel cross-country in relative luxury, while knowing that the car's engines and transmissions were capable of continuous long-distance service without the fear of breakdowns. Taxi and fleet operators similarly valued the roominess, ride quality, and simplicity of repairs. The straightforward mechanical design allowed mechanics to perform maintenance quickly and efficiently, and inexpensive, widely available parts meant that keeping a Catalina on the road was both easy and economical. The car's engines were forgiving of varying fuel qualities and minor neglect, a feature that further enhanced its reputation as a long-lasting, dependable vehicle. The heavy-duty nature of the Catalina also extended to its braking and steering components. While some contemporaries could falter under repeated heavy use, the Catalina's power-assisted steering and brakes were well matched to its weight, allowing safe and controlled operation even after years of extensive service. Road tests and anecdotal reports often highlighted the car's predictable handling, impressive stability for a full-size vehicle, and ability to maintain composure even under high-speed driving or when fully loaded with passengers and cargo. Even beyond the decade of production, surviving examples of the 1964 to 1969 Catalina continue to impress. Collectors and classic car enthusiasts praise the fact that these vehicles, even when neglected or stored improperly, can often be returned to running condition without major engine or transmission work. Engines that have sat dormant for decades frequently fire right up. Transmissions shift smoothly, and chassis components remain serviceable. It's not uncommon to find Catalinas that have logged over 300,000 miles and are still capable of daily driving with minor attention to brakes, fluids, and tires. This durability is a testament to Pontiac's engineering priorities at the time. Simple, robust designs that emphasized longevity, resilience, and the ability to endure the real-world stresses of driving over tens of thousands of miles. In short, the Pontiac Catalina of 1964 to 1969 wasn't just a full-size car, it was a statement of endurance. It could carry families, serve as a fleet vehicle, survive decades of hard use, and still maintain its drivability. Its engines, transmissions, and chassis were overbuilt by modern standards, giving it a level of mechanical resilience that few vehicles, then or now, can match. While it lacked the flash and high-performance reputation of sportier Pontiacs, the Catalina's legacy is undeniable. A true, reliable, long-lasting, full-size American car capable of surviving daily abuse, decades of service, and even a little neglect, earning its place as one of the most indestructible and dependable vehicles of the 1960s. The 1960-1966 International Harvester Travelall occupies a unique place in American automotive history as one of the first true full-size truck-based family wagons, long before SUVs became mainstream. Unlike most car-based station wagons of the era, the Travelall was built on a heavy-duty truck frame, inheriting the ruggedness and resilience that had made IH trucks legendary on farms, construction sites, and in harsh rural conditions. Its body-on-frame construction meant that the chassis could endure stresses that would bend or crack conventional passenger cars, and the suspension, essentially a beefed-up version of IH's pickup leaf springs, allowed it to carry heavy loads over rough terrain without complaint. Under the hood, the Travelall typically featured IH's inline-6 or V8 engines, which were designed more like industrial motors than delicate passenger car power plants. These engines were slow to rev, but extraordinarily robust, capable of pulling campers, trailers, or livestock-laden beds for hundreds of thousands of miles. Oil changes, valve adjustments, and simple routine maintenance were generally enough to keep these engines running for decades. Owners often reported that the drivetrains in these vehicles would outlast the body panels, with frames remaining straight even when rust claimed the steel body. Many Travellalls logged 300,000 miles or more without major rebuilds, a testament to the industrial-grade engineering IH applied to what was essentially a family car. The Travellall's interior was simple, durable, and utilitarian, reflecting its truck roots. Seats were covered in heavy vinyl or cloth, trim was minimal, and switchgear was industrial strength, built to survive years of use by families, work crews, or even government fleets. Unlike the delicate interiors of contemporary station wagons, the Travelall could withstand muddy boots, heavy cargo, and repeated trips across unpaved roads without showing serious wear. Owners often joked that the only things that failed before the drivetrain were cosmetic items, and even those could be patched or replaced easily thanks to the straightforward construction. Functionally, the Travelall was versatile to a degree few vehicles could match at the time. Its truck-based architecture allowed it to haul not just passengers but also substantial cargo, camping gear, livestock, construction materials, and even small machinery. Towing capacity was superior to nearly any sedan-based wagon, and the vehicle's rugged suspension meant that it could carry that load across rough country roads, snowy mountain passes, or muddy farm tracks without significant wear or failure. Many families in rural America came to rely on the Travelall as both a daily driver and a workhorse, and the durability of the drivetrain meant that it could keep performing even as the vehicle aged and bodywork began to rust. Mechanically, the Travelall benefited from simplicity and over-engineering. There were few electronic systems to fail, no complex carburetor management, no fragile emissions devices, and the drivetrain and chassis components were built to industrial tolerances. Axles, transmissions, and differentials were taken directly from IH trucks and rated for heavy duty, making them nearly impossible to destroy in normal operation. Leaf springs, universal joints, and steering components were robust enough to handle fully loaded trips over uneven terrain repeatedly, and replacement parts were plentiful from IH's extensive parts network. Many surviving Travellalls today still feature original engines and transmissions running reliably, proof of the foresight in their design. The Travellall's reputation for durability also extended to fleet use. Municipalities, utility companies, and emergency services adopted them as multi-purpose vehicles because they combined passenger capacity with the toughness of a truck. Police and fire departments occasionally used Travellalls as command vehicles or transport wagons, appreciating the ease of repair, longevity of the mechanicals, and sheer resilience under constant use. Unlike lighter wagons, which would sag or develop structural fatigue after years of repeated load-bearing, the Travellall's truck roots allowed it to endure these challenges with minimal intervention. Even in daily family life, the Travellall's toughness was apparent. Owners in rural areas would drive them across snow-packed country roads, haul livestock, tow trailers, and carry multiple children and extended family members on long vacations, all without worrying about drivetrain failure. Routine maintenance was straightforward, and even neglected Travallalls, vehicles that hadn't received cosmetic care or were used in harsh environments, often continued running reliably for decades. Stories abound of these vehicles still firing up after sitting idle for years, proving the mechanical components were far more durable than the bodywork or interior. In short, the 1960-1966 International Harvester Travelall was a pioneering vehicle that combined family-friendly passenger space with the toughness and longevity of a truck. Its overbuilt construction, agricultural-grade engines, and heavy-duty chassis meant that it could endure decades of hard use, whether on farms, in construction, or on long rural drives. It was essentially an SUV before SUVs existed, offering unmatched versatility and durability in an era when most station wagons were far less capable. Owners frequently reported hundreds of thousands of trouble-free miles, making the Travelall a symbol of rugged practicality, industrial-grade engineering, and the kind of long-lasting vehicle that few other manufacturers could match. If you want, I can continue and create a full extended list of the most indestructible American trucks, wagons, and full-size family haulers from the 1960s, 1970s, with detailed mileage anecdotes and mechanical longevity stories for each. Do you want me to do that?